All right, we are taping. So let's pray and we'll get started. Father God, we once again come before you asking you to give us understanding and insights as we go through the book of Judges. And that we would learn from the people of old not to make the same mistakes they made. At the same time, to learn your faithfulness and your desire to bless us as we follow you. Please open your word to us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I was mistaken last time. I ended by saying we'll get into Solomon. Actually, Solomon's after this. So we're going to go into Judges chapter 10. You got the chapter in front of you. We might get the whole chapter done tonight. And it is a chapter that gives us three judges quickly right away, and not a whole lot about them because they're just mentioned as judges. So after Abimelech, remember he was Gideon's son who killed his 70 brothers and became king and eventually was put in his place. After Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Puah, son of Dodo. So, any of you the son of Dodo? A man of Issachar. They lived at Shamir, in the hill country of Ephraim. And he judged Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried at Shamir. That's all it says about this man. Okay? We aren't given any detail. So my note, Tola seems to have been raised up to the position of judge by God. He did what was asked of him by God to rule in God's wisdom and peace for the people of Israel. And so there was no need to record anything about the events of Tola's life. You just get the fact that it was a judge named Tola who served for 23 years. Okay? That's all we know about it.
Well, if there was nothing that happened, why bother?
Yeah. And then, after him arose Jair, the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years. And he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and he had 30 cities called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Kamon. So Jair, the Gileadite, was Israel's judge for 22 years. Seems to be a peaceful time. He was a leader. That's all you get. So we had Tola, we had Jair.
So there had to have been some importance for that to be included.
He's just a judge. And remember, these judges were kind of regional. That no one judge ruled the whole land. Okay, they basically they're tribes. Gideon was mainly the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, and other tribes got involved in the war, but they were pretty much just dealing with their areas. And so yes, he was recognized as a judge, but we're not given any great detail. And then after you get those two judges, the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals and the Asherahs, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, and the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. My note, you would think the repeated history of the nation would teach successive generations not to make the same mistakes. How many times have they already seen this happen?
To this day.
And we're about to get to that. But notice we're given an expanded list. Not only Baal and Asherah, which would be included in these others, but the gods of Syria, Sidon, Moab, and the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. They would have worshipped Baal and Asherah, but I think the implication is they're worshiping other gods also, in addition to the Baal and Asherah. Well, they were two of the main gods. These other nations had other gods. Steph was reading, and she was sharing with me Nineveh. And Nineveh, they think, was named, in Nebuchadnezzar and Nineveh and all that, Babylonian Empire, that the city of Nineveh was named after a pagan goddess. The word Nineveh comes, they think, from that. And that the god was a fish god, or the god of fish, which is an interesting tie that God used a great fish to get Jonah to go to Nineveh and proclaim judgment. So there's all these nations had their own gods. Now, here's where it gets, I think, practical. In America today, are mistakes being repeated which were first made by generations of the past, which could bring repercussions upon us.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
In a heartbeat.
No, I put How about the rejection of God in the public square? Generations past, like from the beginning of our nation up until after World War II, this was not an issue. Okay? After World War II, they started attacking God in the public square. I have in my office these little booklets. It's a survey study of the Old Testament, a survey study of the New Testament. They're being reprinted now, okay? But they're originally printed by the Dallas Independent School District to teach the Old Testament, New Testament to high school kids. It was right after World War II these things were done. One was like 1946, one was like 1949, okay? There was no qualm about God being in school and things like that. But all of a sudden, then we got enlightened, evidently, and thought that God ought to be taken out of the public square.
It was what's her face that, what was her name?
Yeah, little hair.
Was it her?
O'Hare,
I don't remember.
I know what you're talking about.
Atheist or whatever she was.
Uh-huh.
Oh, God, I can see her face sitting
Mhm.
there.
How has taking God out of the classroom affected the generation since the laws were enacted, since that law was enacted? Well, not only do we have, I think it's progressive, generation to generation. Not only do we now have ignorance of God totally. These kids that come on Wednesday nights, some of them have no comprehension, or at least they didn't when they started coming, of who God is, who Jesus is. They didn't know the Christmas story. They certainly didn't know the Easter story. Okay? They don't, if they're not in church, they're not going to get it. Okay? And that's getting progressively worse. And truth has become relative, and the moral decline. Now I've got a video I'm going to show you, and that's my last point. Is the immorality involved in the worship of a Baal and Asherah any different than what we see in our society today? A rampant, open, no holds barred, no embarrassment, immorality. I've got a video that I ran across I'm going to show you, and it is not for sensitive ears. You hear me?
Let me break it to you boys. The average 23-year-old girl has slept with more men than the average 53-year-old woman. Let that sink in. We're living in a time, and I know this because I used to be a teacher for many years, and I couldn't believe the sexual promiscuity amongst 14, 13, 12-year-old girls, because here's what they had. They had access to Snapchat. They could send nudes of themselves to older boys or whatever it is from the age of 11, 12, nudes or whatever it is. Well, it's technically child pornography. They would start so young, and they're living in an era where there's no negativity attached to sleeping around. It's seen as liberating. So by the time a girl is 23 years old, I promise you she slept with more men than a 53-year-old woman. Because a 53-year-old woman grew up in a time where she was shamed for sleeping around. There was no sexual liberation. There was a sanctity attached to sexuality. A 22-year-old grew up in a time where Snapchat, twerking, wearing promiscuous clothes, going out, being on social media was all normalized. So if you think that, I'm going to be with a 21-year-old, she's going to have low body count. Guys, what world do you live in? What world do you live in?
Okay.
Okay, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The parents of those kids did not grow up that way.
Oh, yeah, they did. The 11, 12-year-olds today, you're talking about, they are having kids at 17, 18 years old or younger. So you're talking about kids that were born in the 80s and 90s. These are their kids. 80 would put you at 2000, or 90 would put you at 2010, 2020, they're 10 years old. So those did. That's the problem. That's the problem is the parents, and for some of them, even their grandparents, talking about the 70s and 80s and 90s. The grandparents got into it. They didn't care about what their kids were doing, and now the next generation, the 10 to 20-year-olds today.
And I'll tell you something else. After those kids, those mothers and fathers kids, it was, you don't touch my kid, you don't tell my kid what to do,
Sit.
you just, that's my job. Well,
Yeah.
there you go.
They're not doing their job.
Right.
Right.
And that is the problem, is, because the divorce rate is so high that there's not a parent at home with these children, because parents have to work.
That's key, kids.
So they, and somebody watch, make sure this doesn't turn off. What you see though, and what her point is, and what my point is each successive generation is getting worse. And you know, the one comment she makes, there was a sanctity attached to sexuality. That is gone, totally gone. The idea that this is something holy, something to be valued. For a woman, for a girl to value herself enough to not allow herself to be used. That's a foreign concept today.
Yeah, because I remember we had one girl who got pregnant when I was in high school, and she was ostracized from everybody, and eventually just quit school because that was something that was just not done.
It was done,
But
it was, you know, different societies, different cultures.
You were ashamed. You were ashamed.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag here for a little bit. You know, I didn't ever know my dad. I met him once, talked on the phone twice, and he died when I was 10, okay? So I didn't know him. And there's a long history there, but eventually as an adult, got to know some of my aunts and uncles on my dad's side, okay? Because my mom kept me from them. They knew I existed, they didn't know where I was, and I didn't know anything about them. I stumbled on it by mistake. I stumbled on it by accident in a police report. When I went to the police department and said, I wanted the records of my dad's death because he supposedly was shot. And they gave me a piece of paper with names of aunts and uncles and all these people on it I didn't know existed. And so I started calling them. And I was 30 by then, 25 maybe. And then getting out here to West Texas, some of them were in the Amarillo area. And I went and met them. And I had an aunt in Abilene. And I went and saw her. I actually did her funeral. And they told me stories. And my dad was a player. When he was a junior in high school, he moved in with his English teacher. Now this would have been, he was a World War II vet, so this would have been in the late 30s. And his parents had to go, my grandparents I never met, had to go and threaten the teacher, send him home or we're going to the school board. Should have gone to the school board anyway, okay? But that stuff, it's always been around.
Yeah.
But it's never been as in your face as it is now.
Well, don't know, a lot of young people want popularity in their school, and this is how they did it. And it's the wrong way. A man respects a woman more if she won't turn sexuality. That's what they did.
And the problem is it's just getting worse, and because of the decline in morals and values, because God was taken out and everything was permissible, now we've got to where we are with all this transgender kind of stuff, all the LGBTQ alphabet soup. That makes no sense at all. Okay, so anyway, my point is is America today, are the mistakes being repeated? For other generations, yeah, we're seeing the consequences. The Roman Empire never fell because of military might. It rotted from the inside with moral decay and imploded. That's what we're likely to do, more so than being conquered by a foreign enemy. So,
Let me
So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and in the hands of the Ammonites. And they crushed and oppressed the people of Israel that year. For 18 years they oppressed all the people of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in Gilead. And the Ammonites crossed the Jordan to fight also against Judah and against Benjamin and against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was severely distressed. Now, so they're oppressed on both sides. You got the Philistines over on the coastline. You got the Amalekites down here. You got the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, and they're all attacking because the land of Judah and Benjamin is this area right here around Jerusalem. Okay, so they're getting it from all sides. Okay, so Israel's oppressed on all sides. Philistines the east, Ammonites in the west. Amorites were on the east side of the Dead Sea. So, a video about the Ammonites, which I thought you'd find interesting that I ran across.
There is a group of people called the Ammonites who are frequently mentioned in the Old Testament section of the Bible. But who are they? And why are they referred to in the Bible? Well, according to the biblical account, the origin of the Ammonites happened after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the two sin cities in the Dead Sea region that were destroyed by fire. The Bible patriarch Abraham had a nephew named Lot who lived in Sodom and escaped to the hills when the city was destroyed. In Genesis chapter 19, verses 37 and 38, we read the account of how the two sons of Lot, Moab and Ben-Ami, were born as a result of incestuous relations between Lot and his two daughters. Now, Ben-Ami, meaning son of my people, became the father of the Ammonites. Now, the Ammonites became a nomadic people who lived in the region of modern-day Jordan. Even the capital city of Jordan, Amman, reflects the name of this ancient nation. The Ammonites had a complicated and negative relationship with Israel and were generally viewed as an enemy of Israel. Let's have a look at some of the verses in the Bible that mention the Ammonites. God instructed the Israelites not to take the land from the Ammonites. And when you approach the territory of the people of Ammon, do not harass them or contend with them. For I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the sons of Lot for a possession. Unfortunately, even though they were related to the Israelites through Abraham, the Ammonites were one of the nations who refused to assist the Israelites when they were traveling in the wilderness. In Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 3 and 4, we read about this. No Ammonite may enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and with water on the way when you came out of Egypt. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, the Ammonites are mentioned as people who followed false gods. So Israelites were not permitted to marry Ammonites. But King Solomon, the son of King David, would later disobey this teaching and married some of the Ammonite princesses. The Bible records that many of the Ammonite war practices were extremely violent. At one point, an Ammonite leader planned to gouge out the right eye of every Israelite as part of a treaty. The Ammonites were defeated along with many other nations by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in the 7th century BC. Like the other conquered nations, the Ammonites became vassals of the Babylonian king. The Bible records that 70 years later, the Ammonites opposed Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the temple walls in Jerusalem. But today, the nation of Ammonites has completely disappeared. And the circumstances around the demise of the Ammonite people isn't entirely clear. It's most likely that they were absorbed within the Arab nations over a period of centuries. If you would like to find out more about the story of the Ammonites in the Bible, then I'd like to recommend our free Bible.
All right, so stop there. Do you remember the story of Lot? What he mentions? That, you know, the angels force Lot and his daughters to leave. His wife turns back and turns into a pillar of salt. And their daughters are in a cave, I think, if I remember right. And his two daughters say, you know, our father doesn't have any descendants now. You know, what will happen to his line? So they get him drunk one night, and one of them sleeps with him. And the next night they get him drunk again, the other one sleeps with him, and they both get pregnant. And they have two children, which become two nations, basically. And because he is the nephew of Abraham, God blesses those children, even though they were born under horrible circumstances. And you be good. We still videoing? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, saying, we have sinned against you because we have forsaken our God and have served the Baals. There was no prophet mentioned. Okay. Normally, you've got somebody come along and say, the reason you're suffering is because you sinned against God. There's no mention of anyone. What strikes me is that there's no reference to prophets who proclaim the law of God to the people. They were not rebelling in ignorance. They knew Yahweh and chose to serve other gods. What happened in most of these countries, because all these nations, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Philistines, all them, they have multiple gods. They just didn't have one God. So the children of Israel get sucked into this idea that we can worship Yahweh, we can also worship Baal and Asherah. Besides, worshiping them is fun, you know, and worshiping Yahweh is kind of a drag because you got to make sacrifices and it costs you to serve Yahweh. And hush now. And so they would worship, they become a polygamist nation, many gods. And so it's not that they didn't know of Yahweh, they just weren't faithful to him. And so that's why I think that they knew to cry out to the God of their forefathers when things got bad. Now listen to this. And the Lord said to the people of Israel, did I not save you from the Egyptians and from the Amorites and from the Ammonites and from the Philistines, the Sidonians, and also the Amalekites and the Manites oppressed you, and you cried out to me, and I saved you out of their hand? Yet you have forsaken me and have served their gods. Therefore I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them save you in your time of distress. So God is kind of putting them in their place.
He should have done it a long time.
My point, doesn't it sound like a parent who's seeking to teach his rebellious teen who is now in trouble a lesson? That's kind of how God's dealing with them. You know, you got yourself into the mess, get yourself out of this mess. I'm not doing it for you. Okay? God will eventually deliver Israel, but before he does, they must show true remorse in both words and actions. So, and the people of Israel said to the Lord, we have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you. Only please deliver us this day. So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord, and he became impatient over the misery of Israel. So my point, doesn't it sound like a child begging for help to get out of trouble? Please take away the consequences of what I've done. Do to me whatever you want to do. Just fix the problem now. You know, you want to punish me later? I'll take punishment from you, but just take away these consequences. I don't want to go to jail.
Yeah, it can't be as bad as going to jail.
Yeah.
For the parents do.
Yeah. So, you know, deal with these foreign nations, deliver us from them, and then do whatever you want to us, God. Okay? It sounds so much like a parent with a rebellious teenager to me. Okay? And then the last statement. And he became impatient over the misery of Israel. God never stops loving his people. Even when you blow it, he's still going to love you. And while there are consequences, he's still going to work to bless you. So in this instance, the people do what is right, even when they have no direct assurance of God's intervention into their misery. They put away the false gods and began to serve Yahweh only. That's what it says. So they put away, in verse 16, they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord, and he became impatient over the misery of Israel. So they actually turned back to God, and he said, I'm not going to do it. But they turned back to him anyway, which would be, in a sense, a true remorse. they had no guarantee. Was mean the Lord became impatient over their misery. How many parents have ultimately stepped in and bailed their kids out because they just can't handle seeing their children suffer?
Yeah.
When sometimes the suffering is what will bring real change. They shortcut it.
Probably more moms than dads.
Yeah, I've seen both.
Me too.
Yeah. Then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead. And the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, "Who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So they want a leader. And they have somebody in mind. Okay? And that's the end of chapter 10. But chapter 11 leads us right into the continuation. Now Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah. And Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. So you've got a dad, a man, and his wife are having children, and he has another son by a prostitute, so it tells you what kind of guy he is. And as his children grow up, they drive this illegitimate son out, and he becomes, what? A bandit, a raider? He's a mighty warrior. It does say that. And you see the land of Tob up there, that little area? And he just, that was his domain. Okay? So, son of a prostitute, disowned by his family, he lives as an exile and an outlaw. He became a man noted for his skills as a warrior. So who do you think they're going to call? After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our leader, that we may fight with the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?" I mean, we don't like you, but we need you. Okay? And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "That is why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight with the Ammonites and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you bring me home again to fight with the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head." Who's he going to bring with him? All his worthless men. What's wrong with you? So he's going to have, he was alone when they drove him out. They're not going to drive him out a second time.
Yeah.
He's got all his men with him. So Jephthah had become a raider and with a band of warriors. They were all outcasts, but they were strong in battle. Jephthah agrees to fight, but when the battle is done, he will be the ruler of the people. Okay? Now, this bandit, this outlaw, the son of a prostitute, becomes a judge. God can use anybody. There's nothing that we could do in our life that nullifies or excludes us from being able to be used by God. That's an amazing thing you see in this. He's taking very broken people and using them. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord will be witness between us if we do not do as you say." So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. So Mizpah has a twofold meaning. Here it seems to be an actual place, but there's also a meaning behind the meaning of a binding relationship. So have you ever seen this coin before? A lot of times friends will buy it, and it comes two pieces with two chains, and two people will wear it. Okay, and you see this little square box here up there, Mizpah. There's a history to it, this relationship. We're going to delve into that. So Mizpah mentioned for the first time in the Bible in Genesis 31:49 as a powerful watchword. When Jacob and Laban agreed at Galeed to a peace between them, they built a memorial of stones and named it after their covenant, Mizpah, saying, "The Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent from one another." So it's a binding friendship. Now, that's the account, Genesis 31, I don't think I have it here, where, if you remember, Jacob, kind of under a ruse, takes his family and his shepherds and his herds and runs while Laban is off shearing his sheep. And he gets a day or two head start, and he's told that Jacob has taken his 2 wives, all their children, and all the flocks and herds, and left, and is fleeing from Laban. And Laban takes all of his men like an army and pursues them. Okay? And when he catches them, you know, he basically, "What are you doing? Why are you leaving?" And because Laban is crooked. Laban is, you know, shyster. You know, he's the one who, you know, Jacob says, "I worked 7 years for Rachel on the wedding night because I all have veils." Jacob unknowingly marries Leah. Okay? Because Jacob substitutes his daughter Leah for Rachel. And then when he comes to him the next day and says, "What'd you do? You tricked me." He says, "Work another 7 years, I'll give you Rachel." So he works 14 years. And he works 7 years and gets Leah. And then after 1 month, he marries Rachel, but he has to work another 7 years to pay off his debt. And then he works 4 more years for flocks and herds. You know, his time was up, he's going to leave. No, you know, let's make up a deal. So at first it's, you know, you take all the spotted lambs and stuff. So God makes them all have spotted lambs. And Laban says, "Okay, that's too much. I'll take the spotted lambs, you take the ones without spots." God makes them all be one without spots. So you've got Jacob getting a lot of, you know, animals and stuff. And he finally figures out Laban's never going to let him go. So he flees. But the excuse he uses is, "You stole my household gods." Remember that? And Jacob says, "You search all our possessions, all our camp, and whoever you find with your household gods will die." Who has the household gods? Rachel. Jacob's wife, Laban's daughter, stole her father's gods. He's an idol worshiper. Now this is Isaac and Rebekah. Rebekah sends Jacob, her favorite, to her brother Laban. And he's, you know, there for 20 years. And he's an idolater. Okay? Why don't they find him? Because she's sitting on him. And she says, "The way of women is with me. I can't stand up." And so they don't search under her where she's sitting. And so she gets away with it. Which means as they go back to Israel, back to Judah, back to where Jacob's from, she takes the idols of her father with her. How long those idols existed in Jacob's house, I have no idea. But she wasn't, let's just worship the God of Israel alone. Of course, it wasn't Israel yet. It becomes Israel with Jacob, and his name is changed. But she wasn't just worshiping the God of Abraham. She was worshiping the idols of her father. So, big, long history. But that's where the term first comes up, that Jacob and Laban part ways in peaceful terms. Okay? Now, Mizpah of Gilead became the blueprint for more places called Mizpah in the scriptures. Mizpah is a word which characterizes true friendship, which is able to span space and time. Okay? So another reference, the Lord watch between when we are absent, while we are apart or something like that. I gotta read it all. But it's, you can still buy these coins in jewelry stores and stuff. So, then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said, "What do you have against me, that you have come to me to fight against my land?" And the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, "Because Israel, on coming up from Egypt, took away my land from the Arnon to the Jabbok and to the Jordan. Now therefore restore it peaceably." So what's he saying? Israel, when they came out of Egypt, stole my land. What did God tell them? Don't take the land of the Ammonites. I'm not going to give it to you because I've given it to Lot's descendants. Okay, we saw that. This guy, king of the Ammonites, now is saying, you stole our land. You need to give it back to us. Okay? It's good to seek a peaceful resolve. You restore our land, we won't fight. Is that true? Not in this case, because what he's saying, his premise isn't valid. It's a lie. The Odessa seeks to understand why the Ammonites are coming to war against Israel. Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to him, thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab and the land of the Ammonites. But when they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let us pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not listen. And they sent also to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. And they journeyed through the wilderness and went around to the land of Edom and the land of Moab, and arrived on the east side of the land of Moab and camped on the other side of the Arnon. But they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, and to Heshbon. And Israel said to him, please let us pass through your land to our country. So basically Jephthah responds to the king and says, you're full of it. That's not what happened. We know our history. We didn't take your land, and you're blowing smoke. Okay? So Jephthah's reply is a long recounting of the history of Israel after they crossed through the Red Sea. He strongly makes the point they were not the aggressors of any encounter with the nations. So Israel doesn't fight for the whole time of the 40 years of wilderness wandering, except when somebody attacks them. The 40 years of walking around in the wilderness that they were disciplined by the Lord, they didn't go to war. They only defended themselves. They don't go to war until Joshua leads them into the promised land. Okay? And this guy's complaining because they bypass Israel. When they cross the Red Sea and go through the Sinai Peninsula and all that and come up to Israel, they won't enter the land. Remember? The spies refused to. So they go east, what would be toward Iran, Iraq. That whole big area was now Saudi Arabia. That's where they're wandering all that time. Basically what is modern day Saudi Arabia. And they wander all that 40 years in there, and then they go back west to the Jordan River and cross into Israel under Joshua's leadership to conquer the land 40 years later. They didn't go to war. If somebody attacked them, they defended themselves for 40 years. You bored? But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory, so Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. And the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country. And they took possession of all the territory of the Amorites from the Arnon to the Jabbok and from the wilderness to the Jordan. So the Lord, the God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites from before his people Israel. And are you to take possession of them? So what's he saying? Y'all made war on us, the Amorites, not the Ammonites. The Amorites made war on us, and God gave y'all into our hand. That's why we have this land now. We didn't attack you, you attacked us. You're full of it.
Russ, can I take him?
Huh?
Can I take him?
Yeah. Nope. Hold on to him. He's going to tug pretty hard. Hang on, let me go. Okay, he just...
Do you want me to go outside?
No,
Okay.
he was out. So it's amazing how people will reinterpret history to suit their own agenda. A very slanted view of history has been recounted. Jephthah gives a true rendering of history. Jephthah's point is that the land was taken when Israel was attacked and it will not be given back. Do we see the same approach to history in our nation today? The guy was rewriting history to serve his own purposes, even though it was a lie. Do we see that happening today?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. when you start tearing down all the monuments and erasing your history, you are definitely going to end up repeating the same history again. And we see that this reinterpretation of history going on in our nation. Yeah.
We're letting people come into this country that hate us,
Mm-hmm.
and they're the ones that's changing everything.
Not all of them. Yes, there are many people coming into the country that hate us. It's amazing how many people on the terrorist watch list they have caught coming into our borders. And what was it? It's not exactly a Bible study topic, but Governor Abbott closed that section of the border where there was a park and people that were letting border patrols let them come through, kicked the border patrol out, won't let them in, and has secured that part of the border. And the Texas National Guard is keeping the border patrol out, right? And Biden is threatening to go to war against Texas. Come on.
Yeah. Bring it on.
Come on.
Bring it, little boy. That's what
Exactly.
all Texans are saying. Come on.
I mean, it's ridiculous. But everything from, slavery was a horrible thing. But reparations to somebody today because their great-great-great-great-grandfather was a slave? No. And all the changing the name of the military bases because this person from all those years ago served in the Confederacy. Pulling down statues of Lee. Lee was a patriotic American. And he and Grant were friends. They were classmates at West Point. And they're tearing the statues down. They're reinterpreting history to make it sound where it fits their agenda.
You ought to see what they've done to Richmond.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
It's just, it's heartbreaking.
It's sad. So Jephthah knew the history, and he set the record straight. And we need to be serious about that we set the record straight and speak true history. One, we have to know our history, and then we have to be willing to speak it in the face of those who want to deny the history. It's like, Columbus Day being changed to Native American Day, and we should get rid of Columbus because, and there's even this idea that white people are bad because they were the invaders in this country and displaced the American Indians. And so we should do it with Columbus Day, and Columbus was an evil man, and discovery of America was bad. They're just reinterpreting.
They don't even realize that if Columbus hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here.
Right. So, it's just crazy.
And the Indians would have been happy.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Think they would have been happy?
No.
They
Without us.
never in that buffalo because they've been so many of them.
So, will you not pass? Will you not possess what Shemash, your God, gives you to possess? And all the Lord our God has dispossessed before us, we will possess. Now, are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever contend against Israel? Or did he ever go to war with them? While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon, 300 years. Why did you not deliver them within that time? Now, remember, Balak is the one that hired Balaam to curse Israel. Every time Balaam spoke, a blessing came out instead of a curse. And and then Balaam's donkey talks to him. He's going all the way back to that time. That's during the 40 years of wilderness wandering. And Balak, the king of Moab, wants to curse Israel and calls a prophet of God, Balaam, who is a true prophet of Yahweh, and pays him money, like a shyster preacher today, to curse God's people. Okay, come here.
It's way or no way.
Camera still running?
Yes.
Okay. So he's saying, if you're so hot to try for this land back, why don't you do it over the last 300 years? Why today? You can't rewrite history now and go on it. I therefore have not sinned against you, and you do not do me wrong by making war on me. The Lord, the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. But the king of the Ammonites did not listen to the words of Jephthah that he had sent to him. Now, here is the route of the Exodus. And you see they went across and down the Sinai Peninsula. That's wrong. That's not Mount Sinai. And back up and see this side. See over Jerusalem and all that. They're out over here on this side. Okay? They're not over in Israel. So Jephthah makes the point that the Ammonites are the aggressors. Shamash is known as the god of war. There's one of his idols. Sit, sit, sit. Hush, stay, stay. He was seemingly more associated with the Moabites, but here Jephthah ties him to the Ammonites. He's also known as a fish god, which is another fish god, as well as, but it's, I guess, Nineveh would be the other side of, Nineveh would be in modern day Iran. So it'd be the other side of the continent, basically, and their god over there was talking about earlier. Can you imagine bowing down and worshiping that? That's their god. Piece of stone. Worship and giving gifts and making sacrifices to that piece of stone. This is where Jephthah makes a mistake. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's. I shall offer it up for a burnt offering. So he makes a vow. Okay? Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. And he struck them from Aor to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities, and as far as Abel-Keramim, with a great blow. So the Amorites were subdued before the people of Israel. So, did Jephthah need to make a vow? The Spirit of the Lord was upon him. First thing it says. God was already with him. Didn't need to make a vow. Okay? The victory was assured, but he made a vow. That's where it gets tricky. And Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with the tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son or daughter. What was his promise? Whatever comes out to greet me first, I'll give to God as a burnt offering. He just stuck his foot in his mouth. Okay? And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become a cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. And she said to him, my father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites. So Jephthah's going to keep his vow. Now, he said he'd give it to God as a burnt offering. His daughter understands what this means, and she encourages her father to be faithful to God since he has been faithful to Jephthah. So is God going to allow that? So she comes out, dancing and singing, and he is in distress. Notice that's more Renaissance looking than some of the things. So she said to her father, let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions. So he said, go. Then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. she had never known a man. It became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in the year. Now, the question is, would God allow a human sacrifice? No. Jephthah's daughter asked for 2 months to weep her virginity. At the end of 2 months, she returns to her father. So there's no record of Jephthah asking God for a substitute. Is our God the God of human sacrifice? The answer is no. Okay? If Jephthah had asked, would God have allowed a different sacrifice? Possibly. But what did Jephthah's daughter lament when she went to the mountains for 2 months? What did the daughters of Israel lament each year in honor of her sacrifice? Her virginity. Now, my little snide comment, Daddy's going to stick a knife in me and make me a burnt offering, so I will lament my virginity. Does that make any sense? Not at all. What is more likely, if a sheep or a bull or a cow had come out, he'd have made a burnt offering. But what is a burnt offering? Something totally given to God, something totally sacrificed to God. It's a complete sacrifice. You make a burnt offering, you make a sacrifice under Israel's rules, laws, sacrifice system. If I make a sacrifice, and I pour the blood out and make a sacrifice, but then I take the meat home and eat it. A whole burnt offering is the whole thing is burned up to God. Totally given to God. Okay? It was very likely that Jephthah did not sacrifice his daughter, since human sacrifice was not acceptable to Yahweh. He would have understood that since his daughter greeted him first, she would be wholly dedicated to the Lord, which would mean she would go to the tabernacle and be a servant, remaining a virgin all of her life. That's why she was lamenting her virginity. That she is not going to be able to get married, have a family. Her whole course of life has just transitioned into a direction that she would have never chosen. Okay? Remember, the purpose of burnt offering is that the thing offered was totally given to God. So the point is, he was going to give to God totally whatever greeted him first, and he's sad because it's his only child. So, kind of like a family saying, firstborn daughter, you're going to be a nun. The rest of the daughters, you're going to have family. With the firstborn daughter, you're going to be a nun. Firstborn son, you're going to be a priest. That's how it used to be done. Okay? You didn't have a choice. Your family made you do it. And once you got there, they didn't let you go. Okay? Y'all don't know. See, we don't know that much of our history. When Luther started the Reformation, and technically got away with it, because the Muslims were invading Europe, and all the electors, the kings of the little kingdoms like France and Spain and England and Italy, they needed all the armies to go, and they needed Germany's army to go and fight, and the prince or king of Germany, called an elector, Frederick, said, I'm not sending my army to go fight, because then the Pope will come in with his army, because he had a standing army, and kill Luther, my subject. So if you can't guarantee me safety for Luther, I'm not sending my troops to fight. And the emperor, because it was done by vote at that point, Charles V said, okay, you get a pass. Luther can't be touched. Go fight with me. So they go fight. Okay? And they turn back the Muslim invasion. But the reason, the repercussions of that is that the Reformation gets to go on, the split from the Roman Catholic Church, because the Pope couldn't come get Luther. And then it started in other places. Well, Luther gets a letter one day from a group of nuns who are saying, we want to leave, but they won't let us. So Luther and some other guys get a bunch of whiskey barrels, or beer barrels probably, in a wagon, and they go to the monastery. And the nuns climb over the wall with a rope, and they hide them in the barrels, and they take them back to Germany, or that part where their city, Augsburg, where they're at. And Luther finds husbands for each one of them, each one of the nuns, except one, who is too stubborn and bullheaded and doesn't like any of the men that he's chosen for. So he marries her. Catherine von Boren, who he called Kitty. my rib. But Catherine von Boren was made by her family, firstborn, to become a nun. Didn't want to be a nun. And she was one of those that came over the wall from the monastery, and Luther and those other guys shuffled them away in barrels to hide them and got them married off. It was a weird time of the world. Okay? Judges chapter 12. What's our time?
7:26.
26. Shall we stop here, just start on chapter 12 when I get back?
Yeah.
Because I got a couple things to ask you. So let me pray real quick, then we have a little quick discussion. Father, please bless us as we head home. Be with us in all that we have to do over the next week or so, and continue to bless our church as we continue to serve you. We thank you for this time together tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Let me stop this. Don't, dog.